Welcome to the debate. Our discussion today really plunges into the complexities of organizing these large-scale esports events. We're focusing on the whole life cycle, from planning to execution that turns a basic concept into a successful championship. We're not just talking about players and chairs, we are examining what core principle ultimately defines a victory for the organizers themselves.
And that examination, I think, reveals a genuine tension right at the heart of event planning. When you really look at the resources being allocated and the metrics that get tracked, you see two very, very different philosophies about what success truly looks like in this kind of high-stakes environment.
Absolutely. So the central question we're tackling is this. In planning an esports competition, what is the single most important metric of success? Is it the tangible, measurable achievement of, say, audience and financial growth targets? Or is it the unwavering maintenance of technical and competitive integrity?
I'll be arguing that flawless operational execution and competitive integrity are the absolute non-negotiable prerequisites. If the whole structure is unreliable, the viewership numbers are, in the end, irrelevant.
And I hold the position that success has to be defined by achieving those expansion-focused metrics. An event is fundamentally a business, and if you fail to grow your audience and revenue year over year, well, you haven't succeeded, regardless of how clean your network logs might look.
That's a strong position, I'll give you that, especially with how fast the industry is growing. But I just come at it from a different angle. Stability before spectacle.
Well, event planning is a sophisticated operation that has to be able to scale. I mean, you have to go from these small, local grassroots events, often running on a shoestring budget, all the way up to major professional events that command seven-figure budgets. This journey, this scaling, is only possible if you meet and exceed expansion-focused SMART goals. We know it's not enough just to say, oh, we hosted a tournament. A successful organizer must set objectives that are specific and measurable, focused on growth metrics. Things like host the 64-player Valorant tournament that achieves 500-plus peak concurrent viewers and a 90% positive feedback score. These metrics, the viewer numbers, the sponsor return on investment or ROI, and tangible community growth, they are the essential proof points. They demonstrate to investors and sponsors that the event is a viable platform, that it's capable of transitioning from, an amateur gathering to the semi-pro circuit and beyond.
And to enable that crucial scaling, you have to prioritize the visibility components. That means allocating serious budget percentages. We're seeing between 15 and 25% for high-quality production and broadcast, and another 5 to 10% for dedicated marketing. That investment is what attracts the bigger audiences and satisfies the sponsors who are funding the entire ecosystem.
That focus on measurable growth and maximizing reach is certainly compelling for a business model. I get that. But I just don't buy that it's the definition of success in planning. Those impressive growth metrics are entirely meaningless if the core products, the competitive event itself, experiences a catastrophic failure. Flawless operational execution and competitive fairness are not merely desirable, they are non-negotiable prerequisites. If we look at the core planning documents, the primary reality acknowledged is the inherent fragility of live events. I mean, the very first rule of budgeting is the golden rule, which mandates including a 10 to 15% contingency for unexpected costs because, and this is a direct quote, something will go wrong. Now, if the driving priority were maximizing financial returns and growth above all else, we would never earmark 15% of the total budget to just sit idle, waiting for an inevitable failure. We'd invest that money aggressively into production or prize pools. The fact that organizers must preemptively budget for disaster proves that logistical security is the highest priority. We also see this when comparing formats. LAN events, which require massive logistical effort and expense, are favored precisely because they guarantee fair play, and they eliminate the high cheating risk and connection issues you see with cheaper online formats. Integrity has to justify the expense, making stable, fair play the truest measure of achievement.
I understand the emphasis on stability, but let's dive into that tension in budget allocation you brought up. If an organizer is aiming to transition their event into, say, a nationally recognized brand, the audience experience has to be front-loaded. If production, that 15 to 25% budget allocation, and marketing, the 5 to 10%, are underfunded in favor of just securing the venue and equipment, how does that event ever scale? It gets stuck. You need the spectacle, the high-quality 1080p 60 frames per second broadcast, the compelling commentary, the dynamic overlays to achieve the key goal of sponsor ROI. If the stream looks cheap, sponsors, who are the core revenue sources funding these massive prize pools, they simply won't sign on for the next year. You're prioritizing internal competence over the external necessity. That stability is only valuable if enough people are watching to justify the costs. If we fail to invest in the audience-facing side, the event just remains an isolated local gathering regardless of how stable the network is. It dies a quiet, boring death of irrelevance, which in a business sense is a worse failure than a temporary network blip.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the priority should be maximizing spectacle when the foundation is so vulnerable to, well, physical constraints. Overinvesting in production, particularly when an event is at the amateur or semi-pro stage, risks compromising the critical physical infrastructure. I mean, think about the power requirements. If the tech lead role is undervalued and the venue's power infrastructure is miscalculated, the event experiences a power failure. We are talking about critical physics here. Each high-end gaming PC consumes around 500 watts, and you're advised to build in a 30% buffer just to handle peak draw. If the breakers trip mid-match, the entire event just stops. The audience immediately leaves the platform, and all that money spent on marketing and hype is instantly negated. The same principle applies to networking. You have to secure stable internet. It's a venue must-have, minimum 100 megabits per second, symmetric, ideally wired, before you can even think about optimizing high-res, high-bitrate stream quality. Stability creates the reliable platform, and until that platform is secured, the spectacle is just a financial liability waiting to become a technical catastrophe.
Right.
So let's shift the discussion to how the event is judged internally. I would argue that true operational success is defined by the effectiveness of the rulebook itself. The rulebook isn't just some list of procedures. It is a constitution of the competition. The implementation of specific, carefully crafted rules. Think about the nuances of a disconnect rule or a pause rule or the required application of admin discretion. That is what protects competitive fairness. And that fairness is the core product we are selling. Without integrity, professional teams won't show up, and the serious spectators will find another platform. If the competition feels unreliable or easily exploitable, that measured growth in viewer numbers is fleeting. It's an illusion built on shaky ground that will collapse the moment the first major dispute arises.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because a flawless rulebook, while yes, undeniably necessary to maintain credibility, it only defines the minimum standard. It's the floor of acceptable performance. It doesn't guarantee a viable business that can sustain and scale itself in a competitive market. Competitive fairness is required, sure, but the real achievement, the true indicator of a healthy future, is tracked in the post-event phase. This phase requires rigorous analysis of audience-driven data, what we call soft metrics, like feedback scores, total new registrations, and most importantly, new followers gained across social media. These metrics are the direct result of high-quality content and the sustained 6 to 8 weeks of hype building that precedes the event. They are far more indicative of long-term audience growth and sustained community appeal than simply ensuring the absence of rule disputes. You need positive, energetic engagement to thrive, not merely neutral administration to survive. If your rulebook is perfect, but no one bothers to click the follow button, has the event truly succeeded in its purpose? In this discussion naturally leads us to the biggest elephant in the room when you're actually executing an event: managing the inevitable day of problems. The planning material itself is clear. Something will go wrong, which is exactly why we budget for that 10 to 15% contingency. To my mind, the true measure of success isn't whether a problem occurred, that's unavoidable, but the leadership team's ability to stay calm, solve, and move on. This adaptability, the event director's executive function to, say, rapidly cut filler content to catch up on time, or to use backup brackets when teams no-show, or to activate a 4G, 5G backup when the venue internet fails, that is what ensures the event meets its ultimate growth goals even after a setback. Crisis management is the final, defining metric of event quality. It shows organizational maturity,
which frankly builds more confidence in sponsors than a perfectly stable but totally rigid operation.
That's a compelling argument about adaptability. It is. But have you considered that celebrating crisis management means you're really just celebrating a failure of planning? Adaptability is only possible if the pre-planning prioritized robust backups in the first place. The core lesson here isn't the drama of solving problems, but acknowledging the immense and constant fragility of the logistical systems we build. The fact that organizers detail 5 major common problems, no-shows, tech failures, running late, disputes, and internet downtime, right next to the mantra to stay calm, proves that minimizing these failures is the primary success indicator. The stakes are too high to rely on heroes. If an event has to constantly rely on activating that expensive 4G hotspot, or if it draws heavily on that contingency budget every single time, they have already failed the planning phase. Success should be measured by the quiet, almost boring competence. The absence of those dramatic, high-stakes failures that ruin the competitive integrity. The infrastructure shouldn't be a dramatic plot point. It should just be an invisible foundation.
I concede that infrastructure is vital, of course. But what percentage of events truly fail and cease to exist because of a power draw miscalculation? While those failures are spectacular, the more frequent, more insidious failure is the inability to attract a second-year sponsor because the production was cheap or the marketing fell flat. Scaling from a grassroots event of 32 players to a major championship requires a mindset focused on achieving external, audience-driven targets, increasing viewer numbers, demonstrating sponsor ROI, and generating positive social engagement. Integrity provides the necessary credibility for the product, yes, but effective, high-quality production and marketing provide the reach and, critically, the funding mechanism necessary for sustainability and growth. The ultimate measure of event quality, therefore, is its proven ability to consistently grow its audience base and attract the capital needed to move up the ladder.
And I maintain that focusing too heavily on growth targets is fundamentally premature, without foundational, demonstrable stability. The sheer complexity inherent in venue setup, calculating power capacity, securing robust network requirements, and the difficulty of maintaining competitive order through a precise rulebook means that flawless operational success is the highest initial achievement. An event that runs flawlessly, fairly, and reliably on schedule, even if its initial viewer count is modest, establishes the necessary organizational reliability. It demonstrates the technical maturity that allows for future sustainable growth. The mandatory allocation of contingency funds reveals that the threat of internal failure is constant. And respecting that fragility by prioritizing technical and operational security is, I think, the wisest and most long-term path to success.
Well, it seems we certainly agree that the entire eSports event planning lifecycle demands rigorous attention to every single step, from the most mundane technical checklist to the strategic post-event feedback survey. There is no simple path to success here.
That's correct. We simply disagree on whether success is defined by how far the organization expands its reach or by how securely it maintains its footing. Our debate really illuminates that constant tension organizers face between the ambitious drive for expansion and growth versus the necessary discipline of logistical security and competitive integrity.
It's clear that balancing these essential, often competing priorities, the need to go big versus the necessity of staying stable, is the ultimate challenge for event organizers. And the way they weigh those factors will ultimately define the longevity and success of their organization in this rapidly maturing esports ecosystem. There is definitely much more to explore in how different event directors navigate that pressure.